Thank you for joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. And here's your host, Chris Cebollero.
I got to tell you, we are in the swing of summer, and it's a great summer out there. Hopefully everyone out there is having a great time this summer, and I want to thank you for joining us again on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. Keep those letters coming. Keep those emails coming. I try to answer every single one, and I appreciate all the comments and, the discussions about the guests. And I got to tell you today, I'm not going to disappoint you because we got another great show for you. And, one of the things that we need to really kind of think about is the future of where leadership is going. And traditionally, organizations, they have reserved coaching, for the people who are at the top levels. They use them as developmental tools. They use them to help them grow and help those bigger organizations grow. But I got to tell you now, when we start to think about the workforce, what about coaching of those folks? Our job as leaders is to get the very best out of the people that we invite into our organizations to help us be successful. But we don't invest time in them. We don't invest money in them. We don't invest in them growing. We just hope that when they come to us with the skill set that they have, that they're going to help us be successful. And we know that hope isn't a strategy. A couple shows back, we had New York Times bestselling author Kevin Kruse on, and we had a great discussion about the importance of employee engagement. And one of the best ways to grow your employees are going to be to coach them. It's going to be to invest in them. It's going to be to show them that they are the cornerstone not only to your success, let me say that again, not only to your success as a leader, but as the organization's success as well. The days of command and control and leading from positions of authority are over. And we need to now invest and coach our workforce to get the very best out of them. When we get the very best out of them, they're satisfied. When they're satisfied, they're engaged. When they become engaged, they become more productive. And the end result is they give our clients and customers the very best experience possible. And that's what we're trying to do as an organization. Today, I am so excited to welcome back Jen Roberts. She's the president and founder of Difference Consulting. It's a company that specializes in helping companies build, develop, and leverage the unique talents of their own people and teams internally through strategic consulting, executive coaching, and proprietary leadership development programs. I got to tell you, we had a really great show with Jen a few weeks back, and we're excited to have her back. Jen Roberts, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast.
I'm really excited to talk to you today, Chris, because this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. It's certainly something that Difference Consulting focuses on. When we talk about building a coaching culture within organizations, it's really about companies focusing on building amazing managers and giving them the skills to be able to create environments where their employees love to work and can really perform their best.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I love that. When we thought about this show, you were the go-to person, and we might have to make you our resident expert on the topic. So, again, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and I know that your expertise is really going to come across with our listeners. So, I guess the first question I want to ask you is, what are some of the typical behaviors that managers employ to drive engagement and performance today?
I think when you think about how managers typically approach their employees, it's like what you said in the beginning. It's kind of a command and control approach. And it's not that they do that because they want to display their authority or their power in the position per se, but it's because of the speed of business. We are moving so fast and organizations are growing so quickly in size and complexity that they're just trying to keep their head above water. So what you'll see a lot of times with managers is that they unintentionally kind of become their own worst enemies, in the way that they approach their employees. So rather than creating a coaching environment, it's more of a dictatorial style.
And I think that one of the things, too, that happens, Jen, is not only the fact of I love how you said that, the speed of business, and I think that's absolutely true, but secondarily, the folks that we have in charge of our workforce, they've got to go to meetings, and they're doing budgets, and they've got project, and they got suspense dates, and they've got, and how do they now have time to grow the workforce and give them what they need to be successful? And I think as leaders, we've got to be able to free up those folks to take care of our most precious resource, which is the workforce.
Well, when you think about the word leadership, really by definition, it's simply an interaction where influence occurs, right? And when you think about the quality of a manager, their influence can be positive or negative. It can be focused consciously or unintentionally, and their impact can be minimal or maximal. So in order to create a coaching culture within an organization means that those organizations have to take focused action to develop leaders who choose to use their power to influence and impact others in a positive way and bring about, those positive results for their own people, for their internal teams, the organization as a whole, and really the organization's stakeholders too. So when it comes to driving engagement and performance within their teams, I think that leaders a lot of times underestimate the power of their actions and the influence on their team members, and then they end up using it ineffectively. I think most leaders really want employees to take the initiative. They want employees to get involved and make decisions and generate ideas. There are a lot of management behaviors that unintentionally squash autonomy and motivation on their team, and that really leads to more of a disempowered work environment and frustration for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that when we think about, actually I don't want to call it subversive, but I think that behavior sometimes really just kind of comes out of it. I know you wrote an article about a year or so back on Forbes, which is 5 leadership mistakes you're making that sabotages employee autonomy. And I think this really kind of goes back to what we're talking about today when we think about some of these pitfalls as we think about, coaching and mentoring. But we're really, and I think you touched on it earlier where you said we're not doing it intentionally, but it's just kind of a reaction to our everyday business.
Right. Leaders are operating in crisis mode. If you talk to people in the workforce, they'll tell you that they certainly don't feel like they have enough hours in the day really to do their own work, much less direct the work of their employees. And so I think that it really does come from a well-intentioned place that leaders and managers are trying to provide solutions. They're really trying to help their employees, but they do that at the expense of really being able to develop those employees and teach them those critical thinking skills that allow them to then, go out and do the work on their own and be more autonomous. So some of the biggest pitfall behaviors that I've seen, in our coaching work that we do with organizations is that they unintentionally undermine other managers' decisions, like we talked about in the previous podcast. When they encroach on that person's decision space, it can have a detrimental impact on their credibility. If they're working on a project that is high stakes and it's not getting completed fast enough, they have a tendency to jump in and take over instead of allowing employees really to work through the solutions and find the right path themselves. They often perpetuate a risk-averse environment. So there's sort of this unwritten rule that failure isn't an option because the manager is being judged in terms of their performance through the performance of their employees. I see a lot of managers and leaders not delegating effectively or empowering positive action on their team, and they really just always become the bottleneck because they're having to give the stamp of approval on actions being taken rather than, empowering their team to take the action.
Yeah, I got to tell you, you brought up a lot of great points right there and a lot of things that resonate almost in every organization almost every day. I was just chatting with a friend of mine yesterday who went on a job interview, and this was for a senior executive position. And even at the senior level, they had to let the last, position go because of siloing, because of not working well with the other team members, because, and when you said it almost in the beginning of the pitfall was, it's that transparency that's keeping the leaders from working together to grow that workforce. And that would be another great show to talk about, is that transparency. But if we shift gears here a little bit, I think that there's always some differences as well between the thought of mentoring and coaching. And, so when we think about now moving into that space, can you share what some of those differences may be?
Well, when you think about mentoring, it's really more about that leader being able to share his or her own experiences or observations. This is what I've seen work in our organization. This is how it is around here. Here's what I would try to do. And it's really being more of an advisor. It's giving advice to that employee rather than asking them empowering questions and helping them come to a solution, which will in turn, extrapolate to future problems down the line. So when you're focusing more on coaching that employee, you're helping them be the best that they can be. You're helping them maximize their potential and find ways to be able to solve some of those problems and know the direction that they need to take without the manager having to be involved every single time. So it's just like an athletic coach on a field. The coach doesn't get out there and do the action him or herself, but they're empowering the team to be able to go out and be the best performers they can be.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And so now as we start to think about bringing coaching into an organization, I mean, me as a leader at the supervisor level, I can certainly coach my employees. But really what has to happen is it has to come from the top down. Why is it important for senior leaders to create a coaching culture within their organizations?
Well, we're kind of in a war for talent. When you think about how organizations are operating now, it's hard to get the best people. And once you've hired your team members, it really takes great managers to keep them happy and engaged. So failing to develop those managers throughout the organization can become a major growth barrier for organizations. And as they continue to rapidly grow in size and complexity and the global nature of business these days, it's increasingly important to develop manager skills and help them drive innovation and autonomy within their teams. So when we think about, how businesses have been operating in the recent past, we've been focused on being very lean in those operations. And I don't know about you, but I've seen more and more managers being promoted where little or no formal leadership development was provided to them before they were moved into those positions. And morale and engagement have really suffered as a result because those managers aren't great at what they do. And it really does take great managers to keep people engaged and happy. So in a recent Gallup poll, about 85% of disengaged employees felt that they didn't receive enough coaching. That was their top complaint.
Wow. Yeah, when we think about that, I mean, again, I don't know why, and I don't know how we got to this disconnect, Jen. And when we start to think, and I've been in the workforce since 1980. And I know what you're thinking, but he's only 30 years old. But I got into, but even then, it still wasn't the fact of, let's grow our leaders. And now when we think about 2017, and I'm almost to the end of my career now, we still don't invest in the leaders and teach them the science behind leadership. And one of the things that I like to say is that leadership is both an art and a science, and you've got to know the measurements of the science before you can paint the portraits of success. And when you use the science of leadership, it really does work. But what I don't understand is how the leaders in the workforce today are not equipping the other leaders to take care of their most precious resource. I mean, do you have a sense for that?
Well, you've probably heard this statement before. People join companies, but they leave managers. It's not really the organization that you become so dissatisfied with. It's how you're being led or how you're not being led, maybe as the case might be. So to be able to keep teams happy, you really do have to focus on grooming those managers and giving them the right skills. And when we think about a company that does this exceptionally well, that creates an environment that's has optimal employee engagement, you think about Google. They have all the fun slides and all of the amenities available to their employees. And so they've actually explored this topic before and applied all of their data analytics capabilities to their own people decisions. And what they looked at, when it comes to some of the engineering challenges that they had, is that the number one thing, again, that people were looking for, not superior technical knowledge, but it was periodic one-on-one coaching that was ranked as the number one key to becoming a successful leader.
And we really have to be able to spend more time on giving our leaders the tools that they're going to need to be successful. So as we start to grow this culture of coaching within our organizations, what are some of the benefits that is going to foster out of that?
I think some of the initial biggest benefits to the individuals who are receiving that training is that they have greater self-awareness, they're more effective in their individual communications with their team members and with one another as leaders. When you focus on truly building a culture, that comes from being aligned to the organization's core values and the top priorities. But it really can give those organizational leaders a common framework and a language that really builds cohesion and alignment within the leadership team, because what you want to see are these behaviors that are trickling down from the top and being, emulated throughout the organization. Ultimately, for the employees, what it creates is a workforce that focuses on solutions rather than problems. You have leaders, managers, and employees at all levels who own part of the business and are really personally invested in its continued success. So what that does is it allows managers then to extend greater trust to their employees to work autonomously. And we know that's important because we have teams that are physically separated these days, and you don't have the manager sitting in meetings with you face to face. You don't have your manager down the hallway necessarily anymore. So the extent that you can provide greater trust and autonomy to your team, is really helpful. And that, of course, goes back to creating greater engagement and retention and overall improved morale for the teams.
I think that one of the things that you touched on right there that I don't want to gloss over was the fact of buy-in. One of the things that we want to be able to try to do is once we allow our employees to feel ownership. I told a story to someone yesterday about an ambulance. So in my business, I was a paramedic for many, many years and wound up becoming the top leader in that field. And I was talking to someone about an ambulance one day, and as the manager, he walked past the ambulance, and it was just dirty. And I said, "What'd you notice about this ambulance?" And there was a couple of things that he mentioned until finally he got back to it's very dirty. I said, these are $130,000 billboards that run down the street, and if this was your truck. If you own this truck, would you drive it this way? And he said, no. I said, well, this is your truck. So make sure that it's something that you want to be able to present. So when we want to be able to grow that buy-in, we really have to do it with that sense of ownership. And I think that one of the things that you touched on was very, very important, that as you now give them that autonomy and as you now give them that culture of coaching, it really gives them that feeling of ownership.
No, that's absolutely true, because what they're seeing then is a new set of behaviors that are being reinforced. And of course, when it comes to the type of leadership culture that you're creating, that doesn't happen by accident. Culture doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you're intentionally focused on reinforcing behaviors so that those get perpetuated throughout the environment. And so having the top leaders of the organization go first and start by modeling those types of behaviors generates greater buy-in and kind of creates an environment where people feel safe to practice those types of skills where maybe that wasn't the case in previous management generations.
Yeah, I like how you said that. And one of the things that I say all the time is that, culture is the behavior of the organization en route to reaching the vision. And I think that was really a great way to put that. So let's kind of think now of some tips that we could share with leaders, who want to create this type of environment with their management team. So as we think about some of the tips that you can give to develop this culture of coaching, what do you give them?
I think the first step is really to be intentional about creating a people development strategy that aligns to your company's core values and your organizational goals, because when you have that strategic alignment in place, it's much easier to be able to drive those behaviors and reinforce them because there's a process in place. There's a framework for being able to do that. So it helps the organization really be able to make that vision come alive and to drive the strategic alignment throughout every level of the organization. So it can be really helpful to partner with an external consulting firm that specializes in helping leadership teams create these types of strategies. So that's step one. And like we said before, I think it really does begin at the top. So training senior leaders and managers on how to model those coaching type of behaviors so that they can then empower managers to take action. So what that might look like is you start by teaching senior leaders some coaching basics, things like listening, being able to ask empowering questions to their management team members, building greater buy-in. Here at Difference Consulting, we offer a proprietary 5-step communication model that, we help leaders be able to work their way through. But then to be able to guide those leaders to coach their most respected, their most valued team members. And as those top influencers within the organization gain traction from being coached, they're going to be more open to learning and modeling those same types of coaching behaviors within their team. So over time, you'll see that culture actually begin to emerge. The next step, from my perspective, is really then to educate the managers on the benefits of coaching within their own leadership teams, because you need your managers to be bought in to the process as well. So helping them see how it will impact their productivity, how it's actually going to make their jobs easier when they don't have to answer questions and have all of the answers, because that puts a lot of pressure, on managers to feel like they have to have all the answers and do everything for their team. So being able to coach those folks and give them the ability to, think for themselves and think more critically to solve problems autonomously is a huge benefit, from the manager's perspective. And then finally, just creating a plan of accountability and follow-up, because with any type of initiative like this, and culture change initiatives don't happen overnight. It takes a while for those types of things to, get the traction and really take hold. But create that plan of accountability and follow-up to ensure the implementation of the plan, and then to evaluate the program for continuous improvement opportunities.
I think that's really a down and dirty strategy as to how you can really start this with it. Because when you think about it, there's a couple thoughts that I have right here, Jen. Once you start this, you can't stop, and it needs to be a continual process, because you can't show that we're going to develop this culture of coaching and then all of a sudden it stops, because you're going to put morale, you're going to put engagement, you're going to put satisfaction right in the toilet. So I think that as a beginning, this is a great strategy to get this process rolling. And if you think about, how you want to start this, is there a specific order that you want to try? Do you roll it out all at once? How do you kind of get it going if you're moving from a position of 0 to 60?
That's a great question, and I think, as I've said a couple of times, I think it's best to start with the top leaders in the organization, because when employees start seeing the top leaders practice the behaviors that they're expecting further down the proverbial chain, right, then it helps them be more bought into it. So I think the first and foremost tip is to create a strategy that aligns to the company's core values and goals, because when you have that alignment in place and you're following an alignment framework, then it really shows people the value of what they're doing, and they can see why it's important to helping the company achieve its goals. So it's less like the flavor of the week effort. And that happens a lot of times with training initiatives and even process change initiatives, is that, if you don't stick with it, then you risk the integrity of the program and people not being bought into it and following through. So start with the top and really make sure you have a solid strategy to back it up.
Jen, I think this is really the straw that just breaks the camel's back, and we really have to be able now to cultivate and grow and to make this really the culture within the organizations, because it's our workforce, again, that really is the measure of our leadership success. People will say to me all the time, you can't measure leadership success. And I say, well, you can. And it's not based on the fact that I can do a budget. It's not based on the fact that I could book a conference room. It's based on the fact of my employee satisfaction and engagement and productivity. And when they give crappy service to our customers, it's my boss who's going to come to me with that complaint to say, why is the employee blah, 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 blah. So I think now as we start this process to say, when we coach, when we invest, when we equip our workforce, we're really going to increase their satisfaction, which is going to make us successful as a leader, make the organization successful, and again, give our clients and customers the most excellent experience possible.
I couldn't agree more. Organizations with strong coaching cultures really demonstrate that they value their employees, that they're investing in the professional coach practitioners and managers. They're helping to be able to lead the charge using those coaching skills in order to support employees at all levels. When they focus on growing their skills and it enhances their value, it helps them reach their professional goals. It helps the organization reach its strategic goals, and it really becomes a win-win for everyone involved.
I agree. And Jen Roberts, again, I want to thank you for joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. You are our go-to expert when it comes to developing this coaching within our organization. So you did mention a little bit earlier that sometimes we have to engage with consulting firms to help us set this up. And if people want to get in touch with you to engage with your organization or find out more about setting this up in their organization, how do they do that?
Absolutely. They can visit our website at differenceconsulting.com, schedule a complimentary discovery call so that we can get started. If you're looking to start this ball rolling and you need some help just with some vision alignment framework, we have a free tool that you can download to begin getting started there as well. So we're here to support organizations and their leaders in creating amazing cultures where employees can really thrive.
And that's awesome. And for everybody out there, once again, I want to thank you for joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. Until next time, I'm Chris Saballero, and I'll chat with everyone again real soon.
Thank you for joining us. The Ultimate Leadership Podcast is a production of chrissaballero.com. You can interact with us by email at ultimateleadership16@gmail.com. All rights reserved.